that's assuming that somehow this federal money is the president's. And in fact, this federal money is the people's, and it is the people who pay taxes. And the idea of the federal government is that you are supposed to actually, look at the people of the United States and try to deal with them fairly.
And who do the people elect to be stewards of their money? The President of the United States.
Yes, but
Scott Jennings is back to set these lunatics straight on the defunding of Harvard due to the pro-Palestine protests. This has been a controversial topic, and I think Scott Jennings has the right idea here. But what do you expect? He's on a CNN panel. Let's see what Scott Jennings has to say.
Harvard has not taken the president or the administration's demands seriously.
The White House is taking on Harvard after it became the first of the elite universities to defy the administration's efforts to take on so-called woke campus policies, restrictions that the university says amount to unacceptable limits on freedom of expression. Last night, the administration froze more than $2 billion in federal grants to the university. And today, the president is threatening Harvard's tax-exempt status, suggesting in a post on his Truth Social platform that it should be, quote, taxed as a political entity, end quote, unless it acts in, quote, the public interest.
When it comes to Harvard, as I said, the president has been quite clear they must follow federal law. He also wants to see Harvard apologize, and Harvard should apologize for the egregious anti-Semitism that took place on their college campus against Jewish American students.
Trump officials portray their fight against the most prestigious and liberal universities as an effort to combat anti-Semitism after contentious campus protests against the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. Harvard sees the battle differently, its president declaring the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Let's start with our panel, CNN contributor and co-host of the Interview podcast at the New York Times, Lulu Garcia Navarro, CNN political commentator, Republican pollster Kristen Soltis Anderson, former senior advisor to both the Biden and Harris presidential campaigns, Adrian Elrod, and CNN senior political commentator Scott Jennings is here. Welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for being here. Kristen Soltis Anderson, I want to start with you on the big picture for Harvard University and the way that the administration is doing this, because there's $2 billion already on the line. There are billions more that could be affected, those grants funding things like cancer research. But of course, there has been that explosion of protest. We've seen many anti-Semitic incidents on a lot of these campuses, and this has become a real lightning rod on the right. Of all of the things that we have seen happen so far this week, the number of things that certainly Democrats are basically apoplectic about, how do you see this confrontation with Harvard and other elite institutions fitting in?
So a confrontation with an institution like Harvard is one where Trump has picked a very ripe target. Confidence in higher education has really been plummeting in this country over the last decade. Even as recently as 2015, Gallup found a majority of Republicans said when you asked, do you have confidence in higher education? They said yes. And those numbers have fallen. They've fallen precipitously for Republicans, but also for Democrats. And I think part of the problem is, to quote Office Space, the question of what is it you would say you do here? That for a lot of institutions of higher education, that's not a question that they've clearly answered. And so when you ask people, why don't you have confidence? They think they've veered too far off mission. Some of these institutions, as you noted, they contain multitudes, right? They do great things like cancer research, but they have other things that I think a lot of taxpayers may be saying, I don't know if I want to fund this. Trump has sensed that, and that's why he views them as such a good target.
I will say, Lulu, these institutions of higher learning have educated an awful lot of the bipartisan people who come here to Washington and end up in positions of power.
I was about to say, it's always surprising to me that Harvard is put as this kind of liberal bastion when you think about a number of Republicans and Wall Street executives who've gone there.
Yeah, well, we can put up a number of the Trump allies who attended Harvard. Now, I will say that the youngest of those that you see on your screen are about my age, so they're elder millennials, so perhaps a lot has changed in the intervening time. But I think, I really take Kristen's point, right? For the middle of the country, beating up on Harvard is not a problem for them, right? But on the other hand, there does seem to perhaps be some hypocrisy going on as well.
I mean, I think to Kristen's point, and we saw this with the DEI fight, there was a reason that they did that first with Harvard, affirmative action, et cetera. Harvard is a ripe target. If you've never been there, and you always know people who've been to Harvard, they'll tell you in the first 5 seconds that they went to Cambridge. They were in Cambridge. It's very annoying to the rest of us.
They went to a college outside Boston. I actually went to Cambridge, the original, for graduate school. So
there you
some
go.
people will say this to me. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not as highbrow as those of you who went to the second Cambridge, at least.
So you can see, just even in our conversation, it brings up some animus. But the wider context within which this sits is, of course, what is the purpose of what the administration is doing here? And we know from Chris Rufo, from Project 2025, and other ideas that have been put out there that they want to really take down anything that is viewed as the quote-unquote liberal establishment.
Question for all my viewers out there. When you hear about Project 2025, do you usually hear it from a right-winger or a left-winger? Is it usually a mega person that you see on your screen talking about 2025? Or is it a libtard that usually brings up Project 2025? Because from my experience, it's always a freaking libtard that brings up Project 2025. They're the only ones that seem to care about Project 2025. And they only care about it from fearmongers that want to push the orange man bad narrative.
So what the administration asked of Harvard wasn't just about anti-Semitism. They asked things that were about who they admit, who gets tenure, things that are, quite frankly, not the remit of the federal government. And if you think about how Republicans have accused Democrats over and over again of weaponizing government, of weaponizing the federal government, here we're seeing this administration actually push into something that has never really been done in the same way before.
I mean, Scott Jennings, that seems like a fair point. I mean, if Democrats were doing this in a way that conservatives felt like was taking on some of their interest in these higher institutions, I feel like I would hear you talking about, hey, government's supposed to be more limited.
Why would Democrats be complaining about Harvard? Like 96% of the political contributions from the faculty go to Democrats from Harvard. There's no diversity of thought among the faculty there. And by the way, I should say, I've had some experience with it. I was a fellow at the IOP. Kristen was as well. I taught a class at the Harvard Kennedy School for a number of semesters. I had a good experience, but I think...
But no diversity of thought, apparently.
But I think in recent years, particularly since October the 7th, the civil rights of these Jewish students on campus have clearly been violated. I don't think the university, Harvard, Columbia, a lot of these other Ivies have taken near enough steps to protect these students. They've been chased around campus, barred from buildings. Buildings have been taken over. I mean, it's ridiculous what's going on. And here's the deal. They take federal money. They have a $53 billion endowment. They take federal money. If you want to continue to take federal money, you're going to have to listen to the people who dole it out. And that's the Trump administration who are standing up for these Jewish students. If they want to give up the federal money, you can create, I guess, the culture of hate that you want, and that's fine. But right now, they're entangled with the federal government, and they're going to have to deal with the president.
Adrian, I mean, I will say...
Why should the government be funding a school that harbors this type of anti-Israel sentiment when Israel's supposed to be our ally? Now, you could argue amongst yourselves whether Israel being our ally or if we should be helping Israel or whatever. You could argue that amongst yourselves in the comment section. Be my guest. But just telling you, like, situational wise, do you think that makes any sense?
What the Trump administration is trying to do goes well beyond the anti-Semitism questions
1,000%.
And the points that are very well taken from you. And I have spoken to a lot of Jewish students and families who are concerned about their Jewish students on these campuses. There are absolutely challenges there. But this is also DEI. It's hiring, admissions. It is looking at some of the viewpoint diversity. That seems like something we could argue about. But how do you see it?
Well, first of all, I think Kristen's exactly right that this is something that this is where Trump is really good. His instincts are good. He knows he is delivering basically red meat to his base by saying, I'm going after a liberal institution like Harvard. I also agree with your point that what would happen if Republicans, all of a sudden, if Oral Roberts University or some of these super conservative, Republican-leaning organizations were also targeted by Democrats. So it goes both ways. I think the bottom line is this. This sets a dangerous precedent. If Harvard caves on this, which so far they have not, they've stood very firm and strong. If they cave on this, this sets a very dangerous precedent for universities.
I mean, as far as I know, we're talking about federal funding here. Does Harvard, do they need government money? Are they not able to survive without the government's money? If Harvard were to say no and then Trump pulls back the funding, Harvard's still allowed to exist. They would just have to get their funding from elsewhere. And then they could have all the little... Palestine protests that they want. It's the same thing like with the whole DEI and everything like that. The DEI hurts Americans, and should the government be funding this?
Universities are not as well funded as Harvard. Harvard is the wealthiest university in the country, but what if we start going down the road with some of these universities that could be targeted that don't have the endowments that Harvard does? So I think, in the words of Barack Obama, who tweeted last night, applauds Harvard for standing strong against unlawful and ham-handed attempts by Donald Trump to stifle free speech and public education. And I think that that's the point that Democrats need to continue to drive, and anyone who wants to support the freedom of education.
And the only thing I'll say, to Scott's point is as follows. He said he'll have to tangle with the president if you get federal money. That's assuming that somehow this federal money is the president's. And in fact, this federal money is the people's, and it is the people who pay taxes. And the idea of the federal government is that you are supposed to actually, look at the people of the United States and try to deal with them fairly.
And who do the people elect to be stewards of their money? The President of the United States.
Yes, but
he's standing up for these Jewish
It's
students.
Congress. Technically Congress.
Who has to spend the money? Who has to cut the checks? Who has to cut your check? Who has to faithfully execute the laws of this country? It's the president.
But if this president
the
is
civil rights of these
trying
students
to
are being violated.
weaponize, this president is trying.
Yeah, now people like Lulu Navarro and dummies that agree with her, now they're all about, well, this is the people's money. This is the people's money. But yet when we're like, why are we sending billions of dollars to Ukraine? Well, all of a sudden, well, it's not the people's money. Oh, no, yeah. And then all of a sudden, we shouldn't get a say in where our money goes. Yeah. Only if it supports Democrat and libtard causes, then that's when it's the people's money and we should have a say in where it goes. We should have a say. And if we want to fund Harvard and their pro-Palestine protests, we should be allowed to do that. Well, yeah, like you said, it is the people's money and it's my money too. And what if I'm like, no, I don't want to fund Harvard and their freaking libtard principles and policies and shit like that? What if I don't want to fund them? What then? What then, Lulu Navarro?
Weaponize the federal purse strings. And the reason that this president is trying to weaponize the federal purse strings is for political reasons. Now, you can agree with those political reasons or you cannot agree with those political reasons. But poll after poll is actually saying that what the American people actually care about is their pocketbook and their purse strings. Issues like DEI, issues like all these other, things that they're getting involved in. That poll's very, very low. There's just a poll that came out from UMass. 2%, 3% of the Americans care about these issues. This is something that Donald Trump is investing in.
Do the Jewish students care about it? Do their families care about it? He's standing up for people who have no advocates on these campuses. Nobody on these campuses will stand up for them because it's not in vogue to do so on the campus. Trump shows up and stands up for the kids.
This is a wider issue than
and that's why they're upset about it.
Absolutely. I think
This
we've all
is not
made it
about
very clear that we
anti-Semitism.
certainly stand with the Jewish students.
The only people who don't make it
persecuted
clear
on
are the
these
Harvard
campuses.
people. The Ivies, they don't make it clear. They don't make it clear.
I think we can all agree that
Well,
not all of
here.
these
They're
universities
there.
handle this. But to Casey's point, this is a much.
I mean, yeah, listen, if there was a college campuses that were allowing, I don't know, KKK protests on their campuses and they were being destructive and they were making black people feel unsafe, and they're harassing black people while we're there. They weren't just standing there holding signs. They were actually, because I've heard that these pro-Palestine people, they've been taking over some of the buildings, like the libraries or something like that at these campuses. They've been harassing Jewish people there. So I guarantee you that if this were like, the KKK or something, and they're doing this to black people or minorities in general, and we were funding it, I'm pretty sure that if Donald Trump wanted to take away funding, or if Biden were president and he wanted to take away funding, then I'm pretty sure these people would have no problem with it. But these people try to hide behind the broader scope. Like they try to make this about a free speech issue, or they try to make it this and that. And even if this were completely a free speech issue, it's not nearly as bad as when the Democrats were in charge, when they were really cracking down on speech, when we weren't allowed to talk about some things without being labeled something or shamed into not talking about it, or banned off social media platforms, even debanked. Like, it was really bad. And you don't see that level going on right now with people who are anti-Israel and such. You don't see people speaking out against Israel being censored online, being banned online, being debanked, being shamed into not talking about it. If anything, the anti-Israel people are very freaking vocal about it. I think they're even more vocal about it than the anti-Palestine side. I hear more anti-Jewish stuff or anti-Israel stuff than I do anti-Palestine and Gaza. But what did you guys think about this, and how did you guys think about how Scott Jennings did on this RTARD panel? Sound off in the comment section below. Give this video a like if you liked it. If you really liked it, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate that.